What's up, everybody? Today's book club review is on a book that gives insight into one of the deepest and the most powerful of human emotions. I just finished it. It is called On Anger by the stoic philosopher Seneca. For those not familiar with Stoicism, it's a way of living that's focused less on what's going on in the outside world and turns the attention inside towards our inner experiences and how we relate to them. Ever since Cain and Abel, human beings have wrestled with the inner experience of anger, and Seneca set out to investigate anger. He wanted to identify its true nature, define it, and offer us some tools on how we can control it. Okay, so what's the story? Well, Seneca in the book is writing a letter to his brother Novatus, who was a proconsul in Greece at the time. Novatus had previously reached out to him for advice, and I guess the demands of his job were kind of getting to him. And when your brother is Seneca, that's not a bad person to be able to reach out to if you need some advice on this sort of thing. And these letters of brotherly advice from Seneca are divided into 3 books. The first book focuses on defining what anger is. The second book explores the role that anger plays in our experience as human beings. And the third book is all about advice on how we can prevent anger or at least control it. So what's Seneca's model of anger? How does he define it? Well, I think before we get into that, it's probably helpful to look at another philosopher's view on the same question. Aristotle had this view that anger was a passion that was dangerous if it was in the wrong hands, but could be useful if it was used correctly. Kind of like a tool or a weapon that is difficult to control, but with practice and time and discipline, you can learn how to wield it. But Seneca didn't believe that anger could be useful because he believed that it was too powerful of a force for people to be able to take into their own control. Anger, to him, possesses those who try to possess it. In the book he writes, there are certain things whose beginnings lie in our own power, but which, when developed, drag us along by their own force and leave us no retreat. So also the mind, when it has abandoned itself to anger or any other passion, it's unable to check itself. Its own weight and the downward tendency of vices carry them off and hurl them into the lowest depths. And if you're like me, you might be thinking, well, yeah, but sometimes anger is the right response. For me, I think about the utility of anger in the realm of sports. Michael Jordan was famous for using anger as fuel to drive his competitive edge and his competitive spirit, making up controversies with people that didn't actually happen, just in order to kind of rile himself up and give himself the motivation that he needed to direct his anger and use that as sort of a catalyst whenever he needed to get going in a game. Well, here Seneca's model of anger really starts to take shape because he's not advocating for this like hands-off, pacifist, accept anything that comes your way sort of attitude. What he wanted was for people to be able to make focused and effective decisions, especially whenever they're going through difficult situations. And anger, in his view, leads to short-term, narrow-minded, counterproductive thinking that doesn't allow you to actually solve your problems. In fact, anger, to Seneca, often compounds the issue because you end up making mistakes in your rage, seeing things through such a narrow lens that you're not able to see the full picture. And what was initially a bad situation actually becomes worse by your own doing. The idea for him was feeling angry is human. It makes sense whenever you feel injured or whenever you see an injustice being done to feel a sense of anger. But there's a difference between feeling anger and acting in anger. And that action, that response, is the thing that we want to avoid. It's kind of like that Batman quote from the Dark Knight series where he says,
"It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me."
And throughout the book, Seneca goes into many of the reasons why anger fails. One of these ideas is a justification that we often use for our anger. And the idea is that virtue has an obligation to separate itself from vice. It's really similar to the idea today of virtue signaling, where in order to show others that you are good, you make it a point to actively speak out against something and show your anger with the injustice in order to separate yourself from the issue. But Seneca makes a really good point. He asks the question, if you're going to take on that sort of responsibility, if it's your duty to be angry with injustices, then when is there going to be a time where you don't see something that's worthy of blame? The anger is kind of like our way of inflicting a punishment on the wickedness. But Seneca points out that there's way more wickedness in the world than we can handle as individuals. He writes here, "What is it that puts a stop to the wise man's anger? It is the number of sinners. He perceives how dangerous it is to be angry with vices which all of us share." Anger is really good at justifying itself. And I think the more we choose to give into those feelings initially, the more we're going to kind of see the world through that lens. It's a well where you go to draw from it, but each time it leaves you needing to come back for more the next time. And the more you have to draw, the lower and lower you have to reach until suddenly you find yourself having to reach too low. So what can we do about it? What are some of the tools in the book that Seneca gives us for resisting and controlling anger? Well, for him, the single most effective remedy for anger is delay. In the book, he says, "Beg anger to grant you delay from the first, not in order that it may pardon the offense, but that it may form a right judgment about it." And that goes back to the idea that Seneca didn't necessarily always think that forgiveness was the right solution. He observes that sometimes you do need to defend yourself and the people you love from bad actors. Sometimes revenge might be the best course of action for you, but doing so out of anger is going to blind you to acting effectively. And he invites people to take a second to pause and think with reason and with clarity. Another way that we can overcome our anger, according to Seneca, is by what he refers to as training the senses into strength. He believed that rigorous exercise was imperative for people, especially for people that have excess energy and a fiery spirit where they needed to fatigue themselves and kind of wear themselves down in order to balance out some of that excess energy. And that has been an extremely effective tool that I've used in my own life. I used to find that I had a lot of anxious and unproductive energy at the end of the day. I had a hard time falling asleep. I was often kind of kept up brooding on things that happened during the day. And what I did was I programmed exercise in my schedule at the end of the day. And what that allowed me to do was all of the pent up energy that I had working at a desk during the day was given an opportunity to express itself, whether I was running or doing resistance training, whatever it was. It's almost like Seneca had written, I had kind of burned off that excess energy that I needed to. And he also had this interesting idea that luxury tends to soften the senses. And here's an example of that. He first illustrates it with the idea that your ears can get too soft if you're only willing to listen to things that you want to hear. If you're not exposing yourself to resistance, it's kind of like you're losing the tolerance that you need to be able to withstand that friction, and your senses become less resilient. And that lack of resiliency is what can lead to anger. And there's a question that I ask myself whenever I'm feeling angry. This isn't something directly from the book, but I think it pertains to a lot of the ideas that Seneca was trying to express. The question I ask myself is, am I a constant or am I a variable? And what I mean by that is, there's two ways of going through life. The first way is living in a state of reaction. We're waiting for outside forces and stimuli to kind of set the tone and tell us what we need to be doing each moment of the day. And you're constantly in this situation where your emotions and your state is determined by outside influences that you don't have any control over. But there's another way that we can navigate these same situations, and that is by acting with intention as a constant. If you know who you are, if you know what value you bring to your relationships, to your work, wherever you're at, you're going to live your life with an intention, and the events in your life no longer have to determine how you respond to them, because by taking agency, you're assuming the responsibility for your reaction. This is especially helpful for me in situations where there's conflict and where I do have feelings of anger, because all I need to ask myself is, well, do I want to be an angry person? Is this something that I think necessitates elevating my stress level, causing myself to overreact, putting myself in a situation where I'm not thinking clearly? I would like to put myself in the other person's shoes before I immediately react with anger. And that comes from a mindset where you're acting with intention and you're coming from the perspective of a person that believes that they're a constant in the situation, not a variable that's controlled by these outside, undefined, and uncontrollable situations. And with that, we can end here with a little perspective from Seneca, who ends his book with a letter saying, "This breath we hold so dear will soon leave us. In the meantime, while we draw it, while we live among human beings, let us practice humanity. Let us not be a terror or a danger to anyone. Let us keep our tempers in spite of losses, wrongs, abuse, even sarcasm, and let us endure with magnanimity our short-lived troubles. While we are considering what is due to ourselves, death will be upon us. Wait but a little while. See, here comes death, who will make you all equals." There's so many great ideas and lessons in here. I really couldn't have fit it all into one video. So this is really just the bare bones. But if you like this video, I would highly recommend getting a copy of the book for yourself and giving it a read. I put a link to the book in the description. This edition is a compilation of Seneca's works. It contains On Anger, and it also has a lot of his other writings all in one convenient resource. If you purchase via the link, it helps support me, and it also helps me make more of these book review videos. So what do you think? Do you agree with Seneca and his model of anger, or do you think he's completely missing the point? Leave a comment down below. I love to hear from you guys. It's a great way for us to have a dialogue, and it's the best way for me to learn from your perspective. So leave a comment, hit the like button if you like this video, and if you'd like to stay up to date and get more book reviews, subscribe to my channel. Thank you for your attention, and remember, stay cool.